So, Jahal, I heard recently you were in DC doing plane spotting for the first time. Is that right?
Well, I actually got back just yesterday. I drove 8 hours from DC back to Cincinnati just yesterday, having arrived in DC 4 days ago. So yeah, it was quite a nice experience.
Were there any particular planes you were excited about seeing, or did you get any good ones, any heavies by
Well,
chance?
I was in DC for 2 days. The first day I went with a friend on both days. The first day I went to Dulles, and that was quite nice. There were we saw lots of heavies actually. There was Lufthansa, Egypt Air, Austrian Airlines, lots and lots of United. Of course, it is Dulles after all.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
lots of Etihad, some others. We actually did make I believe it was the inaugural Lufthansa A350 flight to Washington Dulles. So I think that was nice. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, that was it was I had to get acquainted with actually going plane spotting. I had never done it before. But the next day, well, actually, it was kind of unfortunate. The next day, the next morning, right? We originally went to Dulles because we wanted to catch the Emirates A380 landing at 8 a.m. So we got up super early. But apparently, the Emirates A380 arrived early, so we just barely missed it. Um, but after that, we went to Washington Reagan to DCA, and saw lots and lots of the smaller side of airplanes.
Yeah, and how'd you get around? Did you just drive
Oh,
everywhere,
I
or did you
yeah.
end up taking any transit?
No, I drove. We didn't. The time was focused on aviation, so it wasn't exactly time to take transit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How about you? I saw on Instagram again that you went on another little transit run.
Yeah, I did. I've been trying to do one or two a week. And my original plan to do one on Tuesday, I didn't end up doing one on Tuesday, so I had to come up with something last minute yesterday. So I figured I could probably just go up to Vallejo, and take the ferry back, which I ended up doing. So yeah, like I said, I went up to Vallejo by taking BART, and a Soul Trans bus, and then I came back on the ferry and BART, and then eventually a Samtrans bus. But I think ultimately my main goal was to ride the ferry, from Vallejo to San Francisco, and it timed pretty well because it left Vallejo at 7:15 right when the sun was setting, so the views were pretty amazing.
Have you've ridden the ferry before, right?
I have not actually. I've
Oh,
ridden. I've only been on a boat in the San Francisco Bay once, and it was more just like I think it was whale watching if I remember correctly.
actually,
Um, but yeah, that was my first time on a San Francisco ferry. I've been on some Seattle ferries before, but not anyone in San Francisco.
really? Are you saying well because you're the Bay Area native? Are you saying that I've been on a San Francisco ferry before you have?
Yeah, you must have. I didn't know you took the ferry. Which one did you
Oh, I
ride?
took the one to Angel Island when I was there.
And oh, was that a tourist ferry, or was that like a Clipper ferry that you could use your Clipper card on? Or do you
It
remember?
might have been a tourist ferry, although I have no idea. I didn't buy the tickets, so
Yeah.
does that count?
I mean, I guess it does because you're going on a boat that takes you across the water, which is what a ferry is.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Um, so actually, remind me again. So you are located right convenient. So you're located in the West West Bay, South Bay.
Yeah. So I'm in Burlingame, which is in the West Bay. Technically, it's essentially SFO because that's where Burlingame is.
Hmm.
We have all of the airport hotels.
Mm-mm-mm. Well, actually, well, because the topic that we're going to talk about today is that actually 3 days ago, on August 2nd, 2021, I believe there was an update by BART.
Yeah, there was, and it featured. There weren't actually that many significant map related changes, as we'll get to later. But yeah, Bart did make some adjustments to the scheduling. I think primarily the biggest change that riders appreciate, and will appreciate is the frequency changes. So now every train is running 15 minutes, I believe, all day, which is a big improvement of what they were doing prior to this, where some lines were 15 minutes in peak periods, but for the overwhelming majority of the day, all lines were 30 minutes. And then they did actually make one noticeable map change to the lines, at least, which is that so previously, as you I believe experienced, they now got rid of the Purple Line shuttle from Millbrae to SFO, and instead are running the Red Line from San Bruno to Millbrae and then going to SFO. So it actually terminates at SFO, which is the first for it, because I believe previously the Yellow Line was the only line to ever serve SFO before the Purple Line shuttle.
So I mean, let's give a bit of context for like the current situation or like before the update. So basically, correct me if I'm wrong, but like down in like the lines that run into like the Western Peninsula, it was like from the north. It was only the yellow and the red line. The yellow just went to San Francisco SFO, to San Francisco International Airport, and terminated. But the red line did not go to SFO. It went down to another station called Millbrae or Millbrae, however you pronounce it. What's the proper Bay Area pronunciation?
Well, in the Bay Area, people say Millbrae.
Millbrae. I don't like that. To Millbrae, um, and then if you wanted to get from Millbrae to SFO, the airport, you had to take you had to take like the purple line, which is just one stop from Millbrae to SFO. And so it was effectively a huge hassle, especially if you're coming down from the red line which goes all the way up to Berkeley and Richmond. If you wanted to get to the airport, you had to either transfer beforehand, or you had to go all the way down to Millbrae and then take the purple shuttle, the one stop, one line, into SFO. So yeah, and now what are they doing to the system now?
You mean in terms of what they're doing at SFO?
Yeah, what's the change?
Yeah, so instead, so they're keeping the Yellow Line to SFO, which is historically has always been, but now they're routing the Red Line that at least prior. Well, the Red Line is always ran before 9 p.m. And it's staying that way. So before 9 p.m. it will go from San Bruno, and it will terminate at SFO and make an intermediate stop at Millbrae. The problem is though that the way the station is laid out. Is that it has to wait at Millbrae for like 5 minutes because the driver has to get out and go to the other side, because it pulls in and then pulls back out to go to SFO. So it's a bit inconvenient, but the way they've done it makes it so that they don't actually need the Purple Line anymore, which like you talked about is now not actually running anymore. So now you can just go straight from Millbrae to SFO on the Red Line. But I think it is important to point out that um, there will always be a Millbrae to SFO connection even after 9 p.m. because after 9 p.m. and on weekends they have the Yellow Line run to SFO or run to Millbrae from SFO as it used to pre-pandemic, where it would fill in the Red Line gaps when the Red Line wasn't running.
So now basically like so if I got this correct, now even though Millbrae is further south than SFO, the red line coming in from the north will first go its normal route down to Millbrae and then loop back up north into SFO, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So what do you what
And then coming back, it would repeat that and go to Millbrae and then go back up.
so go south and then all the way back north.
Yeah,
What do you think of this change?
I think it's nice because it's a return to normalcy in a sense, because prior to the pandemic, for at least probably 8 years, there would always just be the Yellow Line to SFO and the Red Line to Millbrae, but oftentimes there would always be a line that would go from Millbrae to SFO that would also continue on either into the East Bay or into Richmond. So it's nice that they're at least not forcing people to transfer as much anymore, because now you can just go either from SFO to Rich. You can go from SFO to Richmond without having to transfer, which is something that I think is new, or at least was easy prior to the pandemic. So it's good, but I think it's a bit inconvenient also to have an intermediate stop in Millbrae that takes 5 minutes. I think there's not actually a way around it, but I think the only other possible solution would be to keep the Purple Line. But the problem with the Purple Line was that it ran every 30 minutes, which is not going to be effective as a shuttle service. Not to mention, it was also taking up 10-car trains, which it never was filled. So it was a weird use of equipment.
Yeah, I mean, I think this change is definitely help. It will definitely help with rider accessibility, so that people aren't forced to physically get off the train at Millbrae, or physically transfer onto the yellow line before approaching that system from the red line. But I mean, I think, as you said, right, having to stop for 5 minutes and have the driver physically walk out and change platforms, that will certainly be an inconvenience to the system. But yeah, I mean, I guess I've actually never been on the Purple Line itself. I've never been to SFO Airport itself. Because I drove, because again, I drove to San Francisco transcontinental. Um, but I have been to the Millbrae station itself, and at least right now, I did see purple shuttle trains coming in and out. So I guess it isn't too much of a hassle to get to and from SFO from Millbrae if you're already there. But if you're adding that onto like an already long commute or an already long train journey, it certainly doesn't help to have to transfer again.
Yeah, and I think actually, if I can recall correctly, prior to the pandemic, there was actually no regular weekday service from Millbrae to San Francisco Airport. Um,
Oh, really?
Actually, I could be totally wrong on this, but I think there were times when the yellow line would only terminate at SFO, and you'd have to go from Millbrae to San Bruno and transfer to the yellow line to go into SFO. So I think it's definitely less of a hassle now that there's going to be all day weekday service up until 9 p.m. on the red line, which this is definitely the first time the red line has ever served SFO.
So beforehand, Bart was like, you guys can fly, you guys can take planes, but not on weekends if you're from Millbrae." Huh?
Yeah, it's inconvenient, and also because Millbrae serves as a transfer point for everyone on the peninsula who wants to take Caltrain up. So now that they have, I mean, I guess the Purple Line did that too. So as long as they have a stable connection, I think it's good. But now that there's every 15 minutes, it's even better.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I guess we'll have to see, how well this implementation goes. But I do want to sort of move on to what we're going to talk about in general, which is the transit systems of the San Francisco Bay Area in general. Um, so again, we've let's start off with BART, right? Obviously the Bay Area Rapid Transit, the effective subway system of San Francisco. Let's ask, Jack, you're the Bay Area native here. Um, I guess, just general question. What do you think about BART?
Well, before I say my actual opinion, I do want to preface it that in my opinion, I don't actually really consider BART to be a subway system because it
Oh,
functions almost identical to what the S-Bahns do in Germany. Because I imagine as you experience the stop spacing is actually pretty far apart. And they trains often travel up to 70 miles an hour in between a lot of stations, especially in the East Bay. So in terms of actually what it does, it functions way more as a commuter rail system to me than as a subway.
hmm.
Um, and I think it's important to note that just like for geographical context in San Francisco, yes, there are a lot of closely spaced stops together. There's Civic Center, Montgomery Street, Powell Street, and Embarcadero. Not actually in that order, but those four are in the financial district. And then you have the stops in the Mission, and then stops in the farther south in the city. But I think the reason why those stops exist is so that people in the East Bay, especially the East Bay, can come into the city from suburbs into the city. So it functions very much like a commuter rail system.
Hmm. Well, I mean, that's interesting because, like, if BART is the commuter rail system, what is, like, for example, Caltrain or Smart or Ace Transit?
Yeah, they really all function as commuter rail, but I think BART does it, but does actually onto my opinion, I think does an actually really good job of providing really good connections to areas because I think, uh, like I was in Seattle last weekend and noticed there was a major lack of just heavy rail that could travel at fast speeds to
Mm-hmm.
other places around the region. And I think I realized that we're pretty lucky in the Bay Area, especially because compared to Caltrain, BART is way more frequent. It's quicker, and can take you to a bunch of different places, and you can transfer. So I think comparatively, it functions really well as a commuter rail system. And I think besides some occasional violence, which is well known to BART riders, and I think BART wants to overcome. They do have new train sets, which are debatable whether they're effective, but they are clean, and they do a much better job of eliminating the noise that a lot of people complain about on the system. So I think BART in itself does a really good job of transporting people around the region, which I think a lot of other regions don't have.
Hmm. I mean, I guess that does make sense. It certainly isn't, of the archetype of like subways in the Northeast, New York, Washington, or Boston. Um, but I mean, you did say, connectability. Do you think like, because I think one of my biggest issues with BART is that just by looking at the map, you can see that quite a lot of really important places aren't served by BART itself, which and you either have to find you either have to take another transit system or you have to just find a way to get there, right? Either driving or getting a ride. Like for example, the entirety of the Western Peninsula, or for example areas um, in between, let's say Antioch and Dublin, or in between, you know, Dublin and Barrier. So effectively, the areas, you know, that are the areas next to the suburban lines, which are just too far to be within walking or biking distance. I think that's perhaps certainly a limitation, and one of the biggest critiques that I would have of BART. Um, but I mean, what do you think about that? Do you think this is something they should work on, something that could be better?
I mean, it's difficult. I mean, for places like Dublin, or other cities, I guess, like on the Interstate 680 corridor between Dublin and Walnut Creek, doesn't have BART service either. And I think it's really difficult to just get service everywhere, obviously, and from a transit planning perspective. And I think it would help obviously to have good bus systems to complement the system, and there are bus systems that go around nearly everywhere in the Bay Area. It's just a question of do they have the frequency to support these like last mile services, and I think they're getting better at it. And just from my experience trying to make those connections, they can work. Like I was able to go from the Pleasanton A station to the West Dublin Pleasanton BART station, and the transfer worked well. But I think that's not going to be existent everywhere. And to your point about the West Bay, um, it's interesting why BART is such a East Bay focused system, which it is. I mean, I guess developmentally there was a lot less development in the East Bay prior to BART being constructed in the early '70s, and in the West Bay there already was a lot of development, and there was the existing Southern Pacific tracks that now Caltrain uses. Between San Jose and San Francisco, so I'm not really sure where BART would have built their trains unless they were underground. But of course, they are extending it now to San Jose, so you can actually go from San Jose to San Francisco. It's just you go around the East Bay, not the West Bay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess it does make sense, and especially since when it was constructed, right, the East Bay, another main goal was to better increase connections with the East Bay to help foster development. Um, So I mean, I suppose in terms of design, it does its job. It does the job it was designed to do well. I suppose just at the time, right? Or in an ideal scenario, that job that they would have given would the job given to Bart would probably have been, could probably have been slightly better, because especially on the West Bay, you see all of the lines just congregating together into the financial district, which you know could I guess anytime you see those together, right? Especially since it's not just one or two stations, but it's like all for all five of the stations in the financial district. Um, I don't know. I suppose there could have been an option to have like some of the lines service, the western part of the peninsula. But I guess yeah, BART does its job, the job it was assigned decently well.
And from a passenger perspective, what did you think of the experience of riding it? Like, did you enjoy that aspect of it?
I think the in terms of the ride itself, it was quite nice. Obviously, it wasn't the cleanest or like the most well kept system from the trains to the stations. But of course, that is the norm in all American public transit systems. But I will say one thing. One of the biggest, um, I think one of the biggest issues of BART per se is that a lot of the stations are just not very accessible walking wise. Like for example, a lot of them are like located by the highway, by the big highway, or are located, not too located in areas in which you almost have to have a car to get there. So I think that's just one small issue that I have. It's mostly common in like the far flung stations, not in downtown, the financial district, or in downtown Berkeley. So I guess there's that, and then I guess the last thing that we absolutely have to mention is the cost of BART. It is certainly not cheap compared. It is certainly not of the type of price you would usually expect public transit in the U.S.
Yeah, it's not, and I mean maybe it's just because they really are more of a commuter rail system, and generally I think commuter rails can be more expensive. But yeah, from any aspect, it's way more expensive than any other regional rail system. Uh, Especially if you go to the airports. Like if you travel from Antioch to SFO, you're probably paying close to like $16, which is ridiculous.
Actually, another thing is that like this was like a big irking issue that I had when I went to the Bay Area. Like BART does not offer weekly passes. They don't offer passes like at all.
Yeah, I'm not actually really sure much of what their fare system is because I've always just used a Clipper card. Um, but I believe, to my knowledge, you can only just buy like a one-way ticket, and I think you're like there definitely aren't a lot of pass options, if any, available at all.
Yeah, I mean, there is no week pass. There is no. Is there a monthly pass? Yeah, no, there is no monthly pass. Um, and so basically, it ended up being right. Like when I first got there, I was like, paying $7 for a ride, right? And I was like, this is absolutely ridiculous. Like in a whole day, right? If I had to take, if I had to take four rides, let's say, that would probably be like what, $28, and that's about the same price as a week pass, like unlimited rides, a week pass in New York. So not only are the individual fares more expensive, but there isn't even an option to have the sort of discounted rate, in terms of like having a day pass, unlimited rides for one day, unlimited rides for whatever, right? Which I just think is is pretty ridiculous. Since in other cities that I've been to, right, Washington, I think in Washington it's like what, $50 for a pass. New York it's like 30. I know in Toronto it's like what, um 20, 22, 24 Canadian dollars for a day pass. Um, so yeah, I mean, basically, if you want to explore the city on BART, right, there just isn't an economical way to do that.
Yeah, not at all.
Especially for people like us who are very interested in transit. I had to like refill my Clipper card like every 2 days effectively.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a lot of improvement in their fare offerings. I mean, it's interesting because I think BART has this reputation as serving people like a lot of homeless people who wouldn't normally be able to afford that much transit. But I guess it maybe either that reputation is false, or there's fare evasion, or just that it is like not really prohibitively expensive for that many people. So it's interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean even individual rides, right? Like let's say there isn't a pass, right? Sure, I guess you can let that go. But like if you're taking just one, I don't know, like let's say you're taking you want to take a ride from the East Bay into the city, right? How much will that cost you? Like assuming like let's say you're going from Berkeley into downtown San Francisco, right? How much does that cost you? $4, $6, right? But
Yeah.
conversely, right, if you're in New York City or you're in Chicago, right, it's 275 anywhere on the network, right? It's 250
Yeah,
anywhere on
because
the
they
network.
they don't they don't they have like a flat fare, right?
Yeah, they do have a flat fare, which makes certainly is certainly you know, and it's not to say that like the for example the Chicago Metro, right? It is certainly not um it is certainly not a small system, right? The Chicago one, it goes all the way up to where does it go? Does it go to
To Skokie.
Skokie? Yeah, it goes all the way up to Skokie down to the south side of Chicago. Not was it 95th Street, and it goes all the way west to O'Hare International Airport. Right, you can go anywhere on that
Yeah.
for I think it's 250. Haven't been to Chicago in a while. Conversely, though, if you're in like you said before, if you're in the Bay Area, you want to take BART right from one terminus to the other terminus, it will cost you upwards of almost $20, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think before I move on BART, I think speaking of expensive prices, they now have, as of 2018, they have the eBART system, which is the diesel DMU train they run from Pittsburgh Bay Point to Antioch, which those riders supposed to be spending a lot of money every single day because often many of them commute into either Oakland or San Francisco, which would rack up the money pretty quickly. But that system is interesting because it's obviously a completely different train set than BART, and it's not electrified, which has actually annoyed a lot of people. But I think it's important to point out that BART isn't just always this regional rail system, and it does have this DMU as well, from my experience, did run quickly. It ran about 60 or 70 miles an hour, and it's air conditioned and felt super. It's super comfortable too. So it's a big contrast to the other system.
Wait, it's from where is it? It's from Pittsburgh and Antioch to sorry.
Yeah, it runs from Antioch to Pittsburgh Bay Point. It actually runs
Oh.
to a transfer station, so you get off and then you have to go to a regular BART train, which then goes another minute to Pittsburgh Bay Point. So it's this intermediate transfer station in between Pittsburgh Center
Oh
and Pittsburgh Bay
yeah, yeah,
Point.
yeah. I did see that on the map. I was looking, yeah, and I saw on the yellow line. It's like, oh, you have to get off and transfer, and I was like, huh, why? Right? Because
Yeah, I don't know why either because I mean, I guess it may just be the tracks they use are different, but they could probably build the newer track at Pittsburgh Bay Point.
yeah, they're just too lazy to extend it all the way up to Antioch.
Yeah, I don't know what they were doing.
Basically, moral of the story: BART is too expensive. Hey.
Yeah, it really is.
Mm.
Um,
So
but in that vein, actually, yeah, go ahead.
no, sorry, I was gonna move on, please.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say in that vein, I think Caltrain also is particularly expensive if you take it far distances. Like it can be $9 if you go from San Jose to San Francisco, I believe. Granted, Caltrain does have a lot of youth fares for I think both clipper holders and non-clipper holders, so you can save a lot of money on it.
Well,
But I know you rode Caltrain over here. What did you think of that?
yeah, so actually, I have taken Caltrain a total of thrice, um, in my entire life. The first was when we met up actually. Um, I was returning to Berkeley from Burlingame, so I took the Caltrain all the way up, and then took in a bus across the bridge across the bay. And then the next two times, I took the BART all the way to Millbrae, and then I got the Caltrain to and from Stanford University, Palo Alto, effectively, and then back the same way. So I've only taken it thrice in my life, and I think, well, first let's talk about like the actual experience on the train itself, right? Um, I think well, what immediately strikes you is that it has the Caltrain the coaches, the passenger coaches, they have an interesting layout, by which, if you go onto the second floor, it's just single seats, right, by the window, and then in the middle, it's just like nothing, right? It's just, well, it's not nothing. It's like just
Yeah, they have some
railing.
luggage racks.
Yeah, yeah. Luggage racks, effectively, which I thought was quite interesting because on the other commuter rail systems which I've been familiar with, for example, in the most recent one is in the New Mexico Rail Runner, or Toronto's Go Transit, both of which use the what's that one called, the Bombardier
The Bombardier bi-level.
bi-level coach, right? Or even in, for example, Chicago Metro, or in Washington D.C. Mark, right? They don't have that. It's, if you go onto the second floor, it's usually just two by two by two by two by two, and then an aisle, and on the other side two by two by two again, right? So I think that was interesting, but other than that, I guess it was comfortable enough.
Well, and Caltrain actually does have some sets of bi-level train cars. Did you ever ride on those, or were you always on the older the gallery cars,
Oh, they
as
have
they're
they
called?
have bi-level train cars.
They do.
Oh, I was not. No, I only ever hit trains with those types. But let me ask you. You take Caltrain like during the school year. You take Caltrain like twice every single day, right?
Yeah, usually assuming there's no delays or I don't have to be home at a certain time, and Caltrain doesn't make that convenient. So I generally, yeah, ride it twice a day.
What do you think? Do you have any like particular loves or particular hates about Caltrain versus other systems as well?
Um, so I think in general, it's a good commuter rail system. I think they do a good job of having frequencies, and they've actually maintained a lot of frequency during the COVID pandemic, which has made it accessible to ride on my transit trips that I've done. Um, but also at the same time, I have over time become annoyed at their older train cars, the gallery cars. I think especially because they are, I think, over 20 years old at this point, and many of them are really bumpy at times, especially when the train is going at speed. So that's not really a huge positive for me in that regard. But I think at the same time, the other bi-level cars, which are I believe from 2004 when they introduced express service, uh, are really nice and run smoothly. Although, interestingly, as you pointed out, the gallery cars do have the upper level with single seats, which actually I really enjoy if I'm just riding by myself. Because if you sit in the bi-level cars, I think as you mentioned in the rail runner, they're all in groups of four for the most part, so you don't have as much space and legroom either if you're sitting across from somebody. So I think both of the train sets have their advantages. The other interesting point is that in all of my experiences riding commuter rail, Caltrain and I think also Long Island Railroad also are both really pushy about checking fares. Uh, I would say probably at least 70% of the time I've been on the train since COVID, there is a conductor checking tickets, which
Oh,
I think
really?
isn't as common. I don't know how common that is in other trains, but there is usually there really isn't a lot of tolerance for fare evasion on Caltrain.
Really? Because I mean, the three times I was there, I did not get my ticket. Well, I had a ticket, of course, right? But actually did not get my ticket checked.
Yeah, it really is random, but sometimes every single time I ride it in a week they check, and sometimes I'll go like 2 weeks without a check.
Well,
So
I mean,
it's really
in
random.
my experience, there are some systems where like some systems, for example, again the rail runner, right, where they check absolutely every single person's ticket, no matter what. But in other times, right, like in DC or Toronto or New York, it's actually decently rare. You don't see it as often, and that's sort of the impression I had of Caltrain as well, because they just didn't, they didn't check my ticket any of the times that I was there. So yeah, but I mean,
Yeah, and
you also did say, oh sorry, please. You also did say, like, in terms of the actual seating itself on the upper level, you actually enjoy the one by like the individual seatings.
Yeah, if I'm riding by myself, that's usually my preference, and I like that they're on the second floor because you get slightly better views out the window. And they also have coat hooks too on some of those on the gallery cars. So if I'm carrying a backpack or a jacket, it's nice to hang it up there sometimes.
But I mean, I guess it's good if you're riding alone. But like if basically as compared to um, the Bombardier coaches, where they have them two by two but facing each other, right? So you have groups of four. I don't think the Caltrain ones they're especially convenient, especially for families, right? Where you're obligated to sit um, on the first level if you want to be together.
Yeah, there are groups of four in the gallery cars, but they're almost always given priority for seniors and people with disabilities. And they're also only usually two or four per train car, depending on the train car. If it's a bike car, then there's only two per car because the bikes take up the other half. So it's rare, I think, that families can sit together on those trains, but it's good
Hmm.
for single riders, which there actually are a lot of on Caltrain, who I know enjoy those upper level seats.
Caltrain is only for like lonely people, people who don't have companions to ride Caltrain with, huh?
Yeah, I mean, from riding it a lot, I've noticed that there's a wide variety of people that use it. A lot of people choose to just to be antisocial and work on their computer. Um, Sometimes you can go and there's a baseball game, so there's tons of people who are like drinking alcohol and
Oh,
excited about the baseball game. So
that's that
it serves a wide variety of people.
that's legal on board.
Well, it was, but now I think it was last week, I started hearing announcements that after 9 p.m. you can't have open alcohol on trains that leave from San Francisco.
Wait, really? Because like I mean, you can't drink in public anyways. So
Yeah, I don't know. I think apparently people were doing it, so now they're trying to crack down on it.
okay, well, moral of the story: Caltrain is for single drunk people, for lonely drunk people. But actually I wanna talk about the Caltrain, the route itself, right? So I mean, Jack, can you give a quick summary about like what the route, the system of Caltrain, where it services?
Yeah, so Caltrain starts in San Francisco, and it for the most part will run between San Francisco and San Jose, running along the West Bay, going through places like Palo Alto, Redwood City, Millbrae, and South San Francisco, and then it goes up along the coast rather than what BART does and go through Daly City. But then
The
it also
coast. Wait,
runs.
when you say coast, you mean like?
Sorry, the I mean the bay side, so not actually the actual ocean side, but
Mhm.
the bay side. Um, yeah, and then most go to San Jose, but then there's also a decent amount of trains that go one stop further and terminate at Tamian, which is convenient for a lot of people who live in South San Jose because they can take the light rail to Tamian and transfer. Um, but then there's also they run services in rush hour. Pre-pandemic, it was three per day. Now it's one per day, and I believe it will still be one per day. Or yeah, two per day actually, starting in late August. That go all the way south to Gilroy, which is about another 40 minutes, but it provides a lot of essential services to people who commute either into San Jose or to San Francisco.
So if you wanted to take the Caltrain from San Francisco, from one terminus to the San Jose terminus, how long would that take?
Well, it depends on the type of service you take. So if you take the fastest express trains, which are called Baby Bullets, it's I believe 70 minutes, a bit just over 60. But then if you take the locals that make every single stop, it can be close to 90 at times.
Hmm.
And then generally most trains are called limiteds, where they make some stops, but they don't make as little stops as the Baby Bullets, and those take about between 70 and 80 depending on the service pattern.
Okay. Yeah, and so basically the train runs along that route, and your house is located almost next to like really close next to the Burlingame station, huh?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, nice. So actually, I wanna, if I can, give a little insight on this route of what I think. I will say that in terms of the actual route itself that it takes, I think its terminus in San Francisco could be much better placed, right?
Hmm.
Because you know the whole point of transit, right, is to offer easy transportation from point A to point B, right? And obviously, it's not possible to serve everywhere, right? Otherwise, you'd have it's not possible to directly serve every location with every other location, right? Um, but I think if you basically the goal for many commuters is to get as close into San Francisco, is to get is to go from the non-San Francisco parts to go from the suburbs into the city itself, right? That's the whole reason why as we talked about BART, why all of their trains congregate together into, for example, the financial
Hmm.
district, right? And
Yeah.
it's not like it's not like commuters riding Caltrain. They don't have that goal, right? They have that same goal, right? To get into San Francisco where all the good stuff is, where they can, I don't know, will do whatever San Francisco people do, like right, like I don't know, fish for crabs or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
and but the problem with Caltrain is that if you look on a map, right, its terminus is not. It is just basically a standalone station, right? It's not. It doesn't stop at a station at which there are connections, right? Like it's not in other cities, New York, Washington, Los Angeles, where the commuter rails they terminate in a central Union Station, Penn Station, whatever, which also has connections to and from right the subway system, or whatever else. Um, Basically, it doesn't have any of that, and it does. And the terminus of the standalone Caltrain station, it's not even in the good part of San Francisco. Effectively, it's located like just barely into like the top part of the peninsula, right? So effectively, if you were to take it all the way, take the Caltrain into, if you want to take the Caltrain and get into the 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 notable areas, the financial district, the touristy areas, you have to either transfer beforehand and take, the transfer at BART and take, transfer at, sorry, at Millbrae and take the BART into San Francisco itself, which will take much more time because BART, I believe BART is slower than Caltrain, right? Since there are more stops. Um, or your other option is to take it all the way into San Francisco, into the terminus station, the Caltrain, and then take a bus or get an Uber into the city because it's almost impossible to walk from the Caltrain station into for example, um, the pier, right, the famous parts. It take like what, like 1 hour 40 minutes. So it's not,
Yeah.
so that's not convenient,
Something like
and
that.
that's what I think about the terminus at least. The rest of the line, I think there could be slightly more BART connections. There's quite literally only one, I believe. Um,
Hmm.
One which has a direct in station transfer where you can transfer BART and Caltrain, but I think the rest of the line, other than the terminus, right, the terminus could certainly have a much better location than it is now.
Yeah, and I don't disagree that the location is bad per se, but I don't actually think I think it's actually they can obviously improve it, but I disagree slightly that I think it's actually
Oh,
it's not it's actually kind of well positioned.
oh, okay.
Um, well, at least so if for a lot of people you can walk directly to the ballpark, which is about a 5 minute walk. Um, but it's also on positioned in a way that there's a lot of major streets that kind of connect at the same place in a sense that a lot of the bus routes that run either from the west of the city or the north of the city can come into the station. It's also fairly close to the Salesforce Transit Center, so you can walk there. Um, and there is a light rail connection, so you can take the light rail south into the Dogpatch neighborhood or north into the BART system. But that is inconvenient, as you noted. Um, but I think there's 2 points to consider, which is one that starting I believe late this year or early next year, MUNI Metro is extending their T Third Street subway light rail that will now go under the city and into Chinatown. So it's actually just going to go straight from the Caltrain station north underground. So you can actually go. It will make it really easy to transfer, uh, starting next year. Um, but I think also Caltrain at some point, probably in the next 10 years, will be relocating to the Salesforce Transit Center, or at least a lot of the high-speed rail vision envisions having high-speed rail, Caltrain, buses, light rail, all connect at this one transit center, which is currently only used by buses right now. But in 10 years, that might change. But for now, there are a lot of transit connections. I think, as you noted, it can obviously be more centrally located, but I think the transit connections are actually pretty convenient as they are right now.
Well, I mean, I suppose it's not bad per se, right? And especially for like I don't mind it at all personally, um, because I want to maximize time on transit. But I do think because it's not effectively you're not transferring from one place to another, right? It's not you're going from you have to take this intermediate transfer system from your starting point to your destination, right? It's you have to take this intermediate transit system, MUNI, effectively, from one transit system to another transit system, right? From in this case, from Caltrain to BART, or from Caltrain to whatever the other system, to a bus system in that serves the Salesforce Transit Center. So if you look on a map, right, you will see that it is just so close. The San Francisco, the Caltrain station is just so close to BART, but it is not. It is not easily connected. You have to get on the Muni light rail. And so basically, I actually this is the route I took the first time I took Caltrain. I went all the way I took it all the way to the terminus in San Francisco itself. And then afterwards, I had to wait for a bus to get to the Salesforce Transit Center, from which I would then take another bus across the bay into Berkeley. So that certainly was not very convenient, especially when inner city buses and the light rail system, they're often very, very often subject to delays or repairs, or, oh, sorry, we don't have any service tonight, right? So I mean, I think having that further connection would just make life very much easier for the commuters.
Yeah, for sure. Um, but also, considering the time left we have in this episode, we have like 15 minutes. So I
Mm-hmm.
do want to move on to other agencies. So obviously the Bay Area isn't limited to just these two commuter rail systems. There are some other commuter rail systems. Have you, or at least in addition to these, have you had a chance to ride any of the other commuter rail systems, whether it be Smart or Ace commuter rail? And if not, were there any other transit systems you did ride that you found interesting?
I actually have not, which given the variety, I just had too many, physical things to do when I was there. But I do want to talk quickly about just all of these different, like, sort of slightly further away lines, and maybe connectivity in general, right? So the Smart rail line, which serves up north, North Bay to Sonoma County, or the Ace train that goes all the way to Stockton from San Jose, right? Um, I just want to ask you, well, first of all, right? How do you think, like, just perhaps all of these lines in general, because they do have similar purposes. Do you think they offer do you think they do a good job at what they're designed to do, and is there good connectivity between them?
I think it's mixed. So Ace itself, I believe, is a really good system,
Mm-hmm.
and it serves a really necessary route. So the 580 corridor that goes from Stockton into Silicon Valley is heavily trafficked. It's a huge road with tons of pollution, and it's a horrible commute. And a lot of people are starting to buy homes in the area near Stockton and Tracy because it's way cheaper than anything you get here, and obviously
Mm-hmm.
the prices here are outrageous.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Ace is a really necessary route that would be better if it were just a bit faster, because right now the existing route goes through a lot of curves and tunnels, which slows down the route, and it's really only competitive if there's a lot of traffic on 580. So I would like to see that route get faster, which there are a lot of improvements that are being talked about to do that, and to
Well,
either build
also,
even a
oh, sorry. Well, also because like Ace Transit, I believe it only operates like what, thrice in the morning and thrice in the evening.
yeah. So pre-COVID they were doing 4 trains in the morning, 4 in the afternoon. Right now it's just 3. and they were really really busy pre-COVID. Like many of the trains were standing room only, so there was room to add more trains. Granted, the line is single track, so it's difficult to have too many trains on it. But there are improvements to be made. Smart, on the other hand, I didn't even realize the train was being built, and I heard on the news one day that it was opening, and wasn't really sure then, and I'm still not really sure now exactly the need it serves. At least, so you can go from Santa Rosa to San Francisco on Smart, but you have to transfer to a ferry in Larkspur. So if people aren't doing that, I don't really know exactly what people are using it for, at least because I'm not really familiar with the commuting dynamics of the North Bay. Like, I don't know how many people actually go down that corridor from Santa Rosa to San Rafael, or whether people go in the other direction. So I don't actually really know the need it serves, but I'm glad in general there is a train, because it just means you can go and access some of the North Bay on transit rather than in a car.
Yeah, if you were ever in downtown San Francisco and you wanted to take a ferry and then like an hour and a half long train to Sonoma County Airport, you got it.
Yeah.
So basically, so okay, so taking the smart in the North Bay, I definitely agree with you, right? Like there is no intuitive reason of why it should be there. I guess for the people who live alongside the numerous stops that it does serve, it does offer a decent service, right? Where if people are able and willing to take a ferry into San Francisco. Ace Transit, though, I want to ask, how good are their connections? Are you able to easily get onto Ace first of all? Like,
Yeah. So the connection wise, they're fairly good. So in San Jose, you can transfer to anything essentially. You can take Caltrain, you can take Amtrak, you can take VTA buses, you can take VTA light rail. You can get to San Jose very easily and transfer to the train. Same goes for Santa Clara as well. There you can take Caltrain, buses, Amtrak. Um, but then when you start getting out into Fremont is weird, because there is a Fremont BART station, but it's far ish from the train station, so you would have to take a bus to get between those. Um, I would like to see a BART and ACE connection, which is happening in 2028 or something like that, when BART actually extends to San Jose.
2028.
So that'll be good to see. And then you can transfer to buses as well in Pleasanton, Livermore, and I believe probably Vasco Road, Tracy, and Lathrop as well. But they're not as frequent as they probably should be. But as long as they time with the train, that's what matters, because the train only runs 3 times a day in each direction right now. But the connections are generally good, and it as I presumably the bulk of the passengers go to San Jose in the morning, where they can get essentially anywhere in the city. But I would be concerned if they're getting off in places like Pleasanton or Livermore, where they'd probably have to get an Uber.
Right, exactly. And I mean, I think I the frequency for Ace obviously is not very very competitive. I think the one for Smart is better. I actually did look at the frequency. I was thinking of taking it just for fun, but I actually didn't end up doing that. So I think there could be lots of improvements there, as well as just more awareness that these systems exist, right? Because like as you said, the 580 corridor, I think there definitely could be more ridership on there, than what is offered, just because a lot of people either don't know about it or have not or perhaps if Ace Transit, if the Ace train, they offered slightly more departure times to make it more convenient to people, I think it could definitely help in raising ridership and easing congestion on the 580. But actually, as sort of, I guess, a side tangent, well, not a side tangent, but like, I guess just another quick point. I want to ask you, like, what do you think about since we're talking about the connectivity of all these different rail systems, what do you think about the level of Amtrak service in the Bay Area? Do you think it is decent, good?
I I think it is fairly decent. I mean, it can be slow at times, because it doesn't really take the most direct route. It goes all the way along the bay to get from Richmond to Martinez, which makes it slightly less competitive with driving. But the Capital Corridor especially is frequent. It runs, I think, like once every 1 or 2 hours, which for a train that that is more of an intercity service, is fairly good, and they also have the San Joaquin too, which runs from Oakland to Bakersfield, and that serves some of the northern Contra Costa County area. So I think in general it is it's a good amount of service, and it's the capital quarter can be expensive, but the San Joaquin is a lot cheaper for some reason. And then you also have the Coast Starlight too in the evenings, going north, and in the mornings going south. So that I think the Amtrak service is good. Uh, I think coming from the West Bay, it'd be cool to have more Amtrak service here instead of having to take buses to get
Yeah. Well,
everywhere.
there's no
But
service. There's no Amtrak service on the West Bay. Eh?
yeah, except for they try to market that you can take these trains to San Francisco, because there's a shuttle bus that connects into Oakland or Emeryville.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, I think again, I've never taken Amtrak ever. But like for example, the first time I learned about, the California Zephyr from Chicago to San Francisco, I learned, it terminates at Emeryville, right? Which is on the first of all on the East Bay, but second of all, this is another problem which I think Amtrak suffers from as well, and we've mentioned before, but there's actually pretty limited connectivity with the other systems, right? So let's say
Yeah.
you're taking you're taking the Amtrak service in the East Bay, right? The California Zephyr, whichever one serves. What's the one that serves Berkeley?
That's the capital
Capital
corridor.
Quarter, right? There's along the entire route, right? There's effectively like there's a very limited number of actual transfer stations, right? You have Richmond, you have Coliseum, and then what? The next one is like all the way down in in San Jose, right? And for example, the one in Coliseum, it is not an in-station transfer. You have to physically walk out. So I think that's another issue in which Amtrak suffers from, as well as we talked about, right? You don't. It's decently hard to get from Amtrak into downtown San Francisco itself, since you have to either take the BART from a very far-flung station, or you have to take a bus either operated by Amtrak itself or otherwise, which also suffers from being far away and being prone to traffic too. So yeah, I guess since I suppose we have a few minutes left, I want to ask you, right, for all of these systems that we've discussed, as well as other things we can talk about later on, right, like the ferries or like the MUNI light rail, in terms of all of these systems in general, right, with the main goal being transportation from point A to point B and connectivity to and from the outer city, the suburbs, and the inner city, as well as with each other. What would you give? What letter grade would you give to the San Francisco Bay Area transit systems?
So for the system as a whole, I would probably give it a B plus. I think
B
the
plus.
coverage the coverage is actually really good. You can go literally anywhere, including like some small residential neighborhood, and probably be able to take a bus that goes near there. The issue is the frequency. Some of these lines run once every 2 hours or 3 hours, sometimes even 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So it's you can go practically anywhere. Like I can go from my house and end up in like in some random residential street in Fairfield, California. Pretty quick, or I can do that, but it would probably take me 4 hours or 5 hours, which in driving wise, it would only be probably 55 minutes. So it's not really competitive with driving here, but I think when you compare with other cities, you can go anywhere, which I think which can be a luxury sometimes. So that I think that explains my slightly higher grade. But
Mm.
I'm curious what you think as someone who doesn't live here, what you would rate it.
Well, obviously, being living somewhere which has no public transport at all, I am also, inclined to give it a higher grade, just because. Well, first of all, let me say the grade I would give it, and I would probably give it a B, a normal B, so not a B plus or a B minus, right? And the reasoning for that is the positives are obviously abundantly clear, like you mentioned, right? There is a lot of connectivity to a bunch of places. You can physically go there, right? Um, which, if you look around cities in America, is not even a guaranteed luxury, right? For example, in Los Angeles, right? there are a ton of places that are just way too far from any public transit at all. Or even, for example, Houston, right, the fourth largest city in the U.S., which has close to no public transportation whatsoever, and you're almost forced to get a car there. Just there's just no other option. So that's definitely a big plus for the transit. But again, of the various issues we talked about, right, the cost is staggeringly high compared to other cities. The frequency is staggeringly bad compared to lots of other cities too, right? As we mentioned, right, the Ace train is they only operate what 3 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, 3 in the evening, right? And the third reason, there isn't very great connectivity between them all either. The Smart to get to and from Smart, you have to take a ferry, right? To get to and from the Caltrain, the terminus, right? You have to take from Caltrain to BART. You have to either transfer like in Millbrae, which is all the way on the peninsula, or you have to take a light rail or a bus onto BART. For the Ace train or for Amtrak, right? There are a very limited number of stops. So that's why the benefits are very clear, but so are the cons, right? But I think for me, because there is this sort of public transit option, that is why I would give it a B as opposed to like a C or something. So yeah, I guess that is effectively our public transit review of the San Francisco Bay Area. Please, to all listeners, if you have other thoughts on the San Francisco Bay Area, or if you've never been on any of the systems at all, would encourage you to please, give it a shot if you are in the city. Try transferring from one system to another. You'll see how horribly bad it is. Um, just force yourself to pay for a super expensive ticket, so you can feel how bad that feels. But otherwise, yeah, any thoughts, please leave them in the comments. Please shoot us a suggestion. But yeah, otherwise, the next time we will be talking more about transit, of course, but in the future we will also be doing more of these transit reviews.